Hello Year 10, welcome to your first lesson on the Emigree. It's one of our poems that we're going to study in the next few weeks. It's by Carol Rumens. You can find some revision on it on the link that's on the screen, and I've got some key images on there. This is a point where you should pause and Google the poem. So I'd like you to print out the poem if you don't have it in your anthology, or you can just copy and paste it into a Word document and work online. So I'll give you a minute to find that. Don't worry, it's very easily available as it is on our specification, and you'll be able to find the 3 stanzas of Carol Rumens' The Emigree. Do that now, please. Now, the following slide is just like you would see in class, so just imagine you're coming into my room, you're getting your book and you're doing your do now task. We have got 4 questions, recap questions on Macbeth. So take a look at them, pause it, write down what you think the answers are, and then let's mark it afterwards. Don't cheat, they're on the next slide obviously. I'd like you to do them yourself. So off you go. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers. So question number 1, how does Malcolm's army disguise itself to get to Macbeth's castle? Now we already know that Malcolm is the firstborn son of King Duncan, and they, along with his brother Donalbain, they had to flee at the beginning of the play after his father's death at the start of Act 2. Now Malcolm is the firstborn, he went to England to raise an army and took Macduff with him. Donalbain we don't see much more of. We know that he's got one of the key lines, there's daggers in men's smiles, but he's fled to Ireland. Now he's not first in line to the throne, so it's Malcolm and Macduff. They chop twigs and branches from Birnam Wood and they walk to Dunsinane Hill. Dunsinane Hill is obviously Macbeth's castle because it's on a high vantage point. Who finally defeats Macbeth? Well, that's Macduff. And what happens to Lady Macbeth in these scenes as well? Alongside it, she sleepwalks, talks to her husband while he's not there, sees blood on her hand, hallucinates, and takes her own life. Now, why is Macduff able to defeat Macbeth and break the witch's prophecy? As he was not naturally born of a woman, he was untimely ripped and she died as he was born of caesarean section. So, we know these witches are tricky. This fulfills the prophecy, but not as Macbeth saw it. Macbeth saw that all men are born of women, so he is invincible. Now he's really listening to the witches in terms of what he wants to hear. They are tricky and find these loopholes in order to keep the audience and Macbeth in a state of anxiety, I guess, because we are looking at a tragedy. Okay, so let's move on to our poem. Now we've got another do now task here, and it's asking you to write out what the word emigrate means, and I imagine it's a new word for you guys. It's not immigrant, it's emigrate, so look at the start of that word. And I put a very basic definition on the board here. It says the emigrate is a traveller who moves from one region or country to another. Now there's lots of further understandings about this word, and it's to do with political conflict a lot of times. So what I'd like you to do is investigate this word further afterwards, or pause it now. I want you to Google the emigree, write down this definition, and then add on further understanding from your own research. You'll also see these yellow circles here. The abuse of power, using your position to exploit others, the power of government, inner or personal conflict, and cultural conflict. Now, once you start understanding what the term the emigree means about this idea of displacement and moving, then you'll see why it's in our power and conflict anthology. And it's for very good reason. We've got the idea of the government being powerful in this. There's a word in the poem, tyrants, which is applicable not only to Macbeth, but definitely to some of the poems in your cluster as well, about people, the masses being suppressed by the bigger powers at work. If we're thinking about William Blake's London, we've got everywhere is chartered, because business owners own the rights of people. So if you have a look at all the yellow bubbles as well and try and build these words into your answer, and do at least a paragraph on what you think the word the emigree means. There's also 4 words on my board on the right hand side: displacement, diaspora, migrate and exile. Again, probably not exile, but definitely the top 3 might be brand new tier 2 words for you. Very, very important for our culture cluster, and high level vocab. So again, I want you to do your own research here. I want you to Google what these words mean, and I want you to try and fix them into your paragraphings when you're starting to talk about the emigree. Right, so what I'm going to do for you now is that I'm going to give you, if you have a look at the images that surround the stanzas now. So let's move on to annotation. Now, normally in class we wouldn't do just line by line annotation, but afterwards I've set you some tasks to work on your poem, not just to copy down these answers on here. So I'm going to go through the annotation that are around the stanza, but I'll also embellish as well. So listen to what I'm saying and try and make your own personalised notes around each stanza. So, there once was a country. So this opening is very story-like, a little bit fairy tale. There once was, and we've got past tense as well. So it's telling the reader that this country is not like it was. How it stands now is not the poet speaker's memory. And we know that this is going to be a memory because of the was and because of the ellipsis on the top line as well. So we've got those ... dots, and what that does for the poet is allow the persona to go back in time. So it's a moment where memory is going to be really important, and it also gives the reader a minute as well to think about why she needs to go back in time to her country. Why might she not be there now? And we start to make all these connections and links to the title, of which we've already exploded. I left it as a child, but my memory of it is sunlight clear. So we've got the connotations of sunlight here, and that'll be a repeated motif all the way throughout, that sunlight is really pure and that she can see in this sunlight all of these memories of her home country. It suggests that that memory is obviously clear, it's obviously happy, and it's something that she's holding on to. For it seems I never saw it in that November, which I am told comes to the mildest city. So we've got this parenthesis here, the 2 commas, that supports this little section that says I am told. So for the first time it hints that there's another voice, maybe the media, telling her about her country now and how it stands. We've got the connotations of the word November. So November suggests that it's when things are cold and gloomy and dark and not very nice, and definitely not a lot of sunlight, but also it's a metaphor for hard times. It's a metaphor for dark, hard times. The worst news I receive of it cannot break my original view, the bright filled paperweight. Now the original view becomes the paperweight, so that's a metaphor, and that's suggesting that the narrator's memories are really bright and positive and fixed and firm, and they are not changing, and she has got great memories of her home city. Paper as well, if you're listening to this analysis after you've listened to tissue, then you'll find that there's a direct connection there. A paperweight obviously weighs down paper so it doesn't blow away, and everything that we want to keep that's paper must be important about our identity. It may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, but I am branded by an impression of sunlight. So here is the first time that we have got the language of military, or the language of war, and it suggests that the country has been invaded, which also gives you the lack of validity and reliability in the narrator's viewpoint, that this place has a tyrannical ruler, that it's maybe had a military coup, that it's obviously in the media and she can't be there. And then we've got this strange line at the end of the first stanza with this connective but. I am branded by an impression of sunlight. Now this motif of sunlight is going to run all the way throughout. And the interesting choice of that verb branded there juxtaposes against this impression of sunlight, which we've already said is really positive. It shows that she's completely fixed, that she's got all happy memories, and probably for a lot of people in that country, her impression is very, very different, and that's probably because it's the narrative of a child. She's looking at this as an adult, but through her memories as a child. Now we're on to the second stanza, and within this one you'll find that she goes deeper into the memories of the city. The white streets of that city, the graceful slopes glow even clearer as time rolls its tanks and the frontiers rise between us close like waves. So we've got a real contradiction here. We've got white streets, graceful slopes, glowing. We've got a heavenly image of this city juxtaposed against what I would call the semantic field of the military language, militarized language. As time rolls its tanks, that simile there, as time rolls its tanks and the frontiers rise between us. Tanks and frontiers, that's we would only really use that vocabulary when we're talking in military terminology. So we've got the idea that time is personified just like the enemy, but it doesn't affect her memories. That the enemy, the people that have taken over, the invaders into her city, using these weapons like tanks and frontiers, can't change her original view of her city. And we've got that. I've got another simile there. The frontiers rise between us, close like waves. So we've got the distance. She's had to travel. She's had to emigrate across seas, probably that are dangerous, and waves lap against one another. So we've got that image of the sea closely touching one another, that we're all connected through the ocean. That child's vocabulary I carried here like a hollow doll opens and spills a grammar. So this is a really strange phrasing, and probably because it's not her mother tongue, and she does that on purpose. So we've got a persona in here that speaks a different language to the country that she's in, and she calls it her child's vocabulary. She carries it like a hollow doll, another simile as well. That this doll, this imaginary doll that she's holding, within it, this hollow doll, all her language, all her words and all her memories spill out from her home country. Soon I shall have every coloured molecule of it. Again, lovely language of childhood. We're talking in colour. It may now be a lie banned by the state, but I can't get it off my tongue. So this is about suppression. So there's the idea here that the state that own the country now, that run the country now, have banned her language, that she might not, if she's caught, or if anyone's caught talking in this language, it's banned by the state. But she can't get it off her tongue, obviously, because that's how she converses, that's how she talks, that's how she thinks in this language. And again, the repeated motif, it tastes of sunlight, some sensory writing there. It gives us this sense of vividness of her experience using her language, which is great for a culture comparison with checking out history. So this is the third and final stanza, and it goes further into her memories and it goes directly into the city. It's probably the stanza that has the most dark imagery, which also contrasts with the ideas of white and sunlight. So let's have a look. I have no passport, there's no way back at all. So this hopeless opening line shows us that she's fled illegally. She didn't go through border control, probably because if she went through border control she would have been killed. So she had to leave, we don't know when, in the middle of the night, on a boat, things that we've seen in the media in the past few years. So there's no way back for her to at all. that she hasn't got any identity. She hasn't got that form of identity in her passport. And we've got the contrasting connective again. But my city comes to me in the form of memory, in its own white plane. So we've got the city personified now as a paper plane. It's white, so it's pure, and it's childlike. So paper planes are used in classrooms. They're used when children play. So we've got the idea of a paper plane representing the speaker's memories there. And this extended personification changes now. It says, it lies down in front of me, docile as paper. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. So this white paper plane that was the city that came to her has now been transformed into some sort of pet or doll or something that a child would take joy in. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. My city takes me dancing through the city of walls. Repetition of city there, and at the first part of the sentence, my city takes me dancing is this beautiful positive partner, and then we get the realisation of this contrasting perception that the city is a city of walls, that it's really restrictive, that she wouldn't be able to dance through it literally, only metaphorically. And then we've got this really interesting set of lines that talk about they. They accuse me of absence, they circle me, they accuse me of being dark in their free city. It is unclear who the they is. This collective pronoun stands in for some pocket of society, and we think that that's probably the invaders, the militarised people that have taken over her city, and it's how they view the persona here. They accuse me of absence, that she has fled illegally, that she is the enemy. They circle me and they accuse me of being dark in their free city. So we've got the perception and we've got the idea that the invaders view the child and who she belongs to, her race, her religion, we're unsure, as dark, as not allowed, as the enemy. My city hides behind me. They mutter death, and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight. Now I like to read this line in one of two ways. You'll see the white annotation at the bottom there, that we've got this repeated motif of sunlight again as evidence of sunlight, like her whole identity. She just wants people to know that it's defined by her city and it's positive and it's about sunlight. However, you can see in the last 4 lines that if she was literally to return to her home city somehow, she would be killed. They mutter death, they circle her, they accuse her, and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight. Now I read this as well as this is her potential death, that the only thing that would be left of her if she went back to her city would just be her shadow, much like the blood shadow in Simon Armitage's Remains, that's the only evidence of her identity, that the sun would shine on the ground and all that would be left is a shadow of where she lay. So a really, really interesting poem, really rich in its metaphor, lots of similes. Structurally, I'd like you to do some more work on why it might be in 3 stanzas and why the last stanza takes you right into the city of walls. Okay, and to wrap it up, I've got 4 different tasks for you here, these at-home tasks. Now that you understand the poem and its content and the annotation around it, you can obviously go back to the annotation, look at it more structurally, look at it just for language, look at it for colour imagery. But really, I've got these tasks to solidify your learning. So the top one, can you do some AO3 background knowledge to our poet? I've deliberately not given you information about Carol Rumens. I want you to tell me, is this her? Is it a persona or a poet speaker? Has she ever suffered displacement? So you have to investigate what that word means. Find out a little bit about why she might talk about marginalised people. After that, you can create a journal of a travelling child migrating from her home to a strange country and how that might be. Use the picture for inspiration. And then an interesting one, maybe quite hard. Can you recreate the poem from the perspective of a parent sending their child away for safety? 3 stanzas, what it might be like to be trapped in the city of walls. And then very lastly, can you draw 2 images? One of the memory of the child's home country, so what it looks like. Is it about the city of walls? How would you put it in a paperweight, for example? And then a really interesting one about language and mother tongues and speaking, thinking in a different language and being able to think that way, and then have to translate it into English, for example, and how difficult that must be. So the second picture, could you bring to life the line, she carries it like a hollow doll, it opens and spills a grammar. What might that look like in picture form? Obviously, I'm here to help. Drop some comments in the bottom in the comment section of the YouTube channel. This is my very first one, so be kind. I am happy to do any lesson, any literature text, any language question, and I'll try and do 1 a day. Send in all your written work to school, either via the office email address or my email address, which I will get sent out to you. And keep well, stay at home. See you soon.